Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Thais Linhares Banal. I am Senior Forestry Officer here in FAO, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, where I lead the Forest Governance and Economics team and the initiative Sustainable Wood for a Sustainable World. I am a Brazilian economist with background on sustainable finance and the forest and climate change governance. I'm excited to moderate this panel today, Forest Investments in the Decade of Climate Change Transformation. The speakers are all very knowledgeable, and I'm eager to learn from them the opportunities of investments in forestry coherent with the needs of sustainable food systems and climate resilient economies. Without more words, let me introduce the speakers. We have Marcel de Boer from our Green Spine. Marcel has an economic background with 30 years of experience in the pension world and more than 25 years of experience with responsible, sustainable investment. Based on research into the active cooling role of forests by water, Marcel found out that we can achieve our climate target faster, cheaper, with less risk and more social perspective. We also have in the panel Patrick Kusisto from the Impact Innovation Institute. Patrick has more than 30 years of direct CIO experience from two of the largest pension funds in Finland and sovereign wealth fund in the Middle East. His forestry experience includes being the first chairman of Donator and co-founder of the Bezos Capital. He is also founder of the Impact Innovation Institute and a for-benefit research and advisory boutique, which has recently coined the sustainable portfolio theory. We have a second Patrick with us today, Patrick Lehtonen. Patrick from the Particip. Patrick is a forest economist who is currently working in the Forest for the Future facility of the European Commission, providing advisory services on forest interventions in developing partner countries. He focuses on finance and sustainable forest value chains with long-term experience with global forest investments. And we have now Peter Holmgren. Peter has worked for 14 years in FAO in different capacities, including as leader of the Global Forest Resource Assessment, Chief of Forest Resource Development, and Director of Climate Change. He also served 5 years as Director General of CIFOR. He currently works as Senior Advisor on Sustainable Development and Climate Action to the forest-based industry in Sweden and Europe. This panel will follow an interview structure, and the speakers will answer questions from the audience in the last 10 minutes. I kindly ask the speakers to respect the 3 minutes limit for the answers. With that, I would like to start with Marcel. Marcel, please. Is the level of investments we have now able to keep the level of forest ecosystem services we need for achieving the SDGs and the climate resilient economy?
Okay, well, thank you, Thijs, for the introduction. On your question, well, in my opinion, and based on extensive research, I would say nowhere near enough. Why? Because a very important cooling function of the ecosystem services is not seen. And therefore, we don't see the enormous value for our society. We will not see how to reward investments in the right way. So what is the thing that we overlook? What is the elephant in the room? We all know that our CO2 emissions contributed to a rise in temperature. Only our CO2 emissions are just one part of our contribution to the rise in temperature. The other part is our influence on the water cycle. So let's first go back to the basics. We all know that CO2, along with water, a little sunlight, and some magic, produces glucose and oxygen. But for a tree to harvest 1 molecule of CO2, a tree evapotranspires, as we humans sweat, at least 100 molecules of water, depending on the species and the origin and the location of the tree. And evaporating water takes a lot of energy. And this energy remains hidden in the water molecule, and in the climate models, we call this latent heat. To give you an idea, the Brazilian rainforest evapotranspirate during the day every second, the equivalent of 15 atomic bombs the size of Hiroshima. And the latent heat is released when water vapor turns back into water when clouds are formed, the moment water vapor connects to small aerosols. A significant part of this energy goes directly into space. Then the clouds reflect sunlight and ensure that less sunlight reaches the Earth's surface. And this process acts like a giant air conditioning with two main parts. First, the coolant liquid, in this case water, and secondly, the engine that pumps around the coolant. The Earth has two different air conditioners. One is a passive one, where the sun evaporates the water of the oceans, and an active one, where trees are the engines of evaporation. We call the coolant of the passive aircon blue water, and that of nature, we call it green water. But when you cut down the trees, you lower the green water level of the natural air conditioning, and you reduce the suction effect of blue water to the land by nature, and you reduce the production of natural aerosols, which led to less stronger cloud reflection, and altogether, this reduces the cooling power by nature and thus causes a rise in temperature. And let's not forget that since our massive CO2 emissions, we have cut also a massive scale, high quality forest, namely 9 million square kilometers, the size of 13 times the size of France, and thus affected the cooling power of Earth. And less cooling power has the same effect as an increase in insulation. And to wrap up, our research makes it very plausible that in the climate models, the decrease in the cooling effect is added to the heating effect of CO2. And therefore, the temperature sensitivity of CO2 is overestimated. But the good news is, when you see the working of the natural air conditioning, you also see how we can restore nature in a very smart way at very low cost. And the thing is, the ultimate cooling power of nature is also the ultimate public good of society. And it will be crucial that we are able to reward private parties, but also countries such as Brazil, for maintaining and expanding the public cooling function. So at the end, there is a friendly elephant in the room that just want to tell us that there's more than CO2, and that when we see that green water cools, we also see our climate solution. So it's all about water and also a little bit of CO2.
Thank you, Marcel. We will have time to come back to that. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask now Petri Lehtonen. Forests are crucial to society for all the ecosystem services they deliver. And Marcel has just given us an example of the relationship with water for global warming. But timber provision is also a very important ecosystem service. How can we solve the equation of sufficient investment to achieve the level of forest services and products that we need?
Thank you, Thijs. First thing that I have in my mind is that when we think like climate financing forest land restoration, it's quite important that we acknowledge value chains, that the kind of earning logic with value chains is at least somehow part of the equation. And maybe another aspect is that like the investments, where we need investment most are normally in poor countries, in developing countries where deforestation and forest degradation continue. And we have like, I don't know, maybe that kind of mainstream public approaches have been focusing on, let's say, conservation, provision of ecosystem services with, let's say, payment for ecosystem services like REDD+. I think that they are not really sufficient to attract investors. So investors are always looking at expected risk-adjusted returns, and actually also the other part is that it's also related to job creation at local level. So I think that we need to combine these, so that we need to combine investments where we kind of have value chains, but at the same time landscape where we can conserve and have forest land restorations. So what we really need to solve this equation is that we need measures that reduce risks in these emerging frontier markets. And there are like improving the business environments and all the capacities. But the other part is that we also need to think in a new way. We need to combine this kind of conventional development aid and also, let's say, conventional financial instruments. We already have such in place, like blended. We talk about blended finance, and it means that we need to kind of combine targeted technical assistance to build capacities, and also like concessional financing, and also pension fund or other institutional investments. So once we can combine these, I think that we are one step ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petri. And you gave me a very good segue to ask Petri Kuusisto, who is an investor, is at the other side, to tell us what are the main drivers for forest investment in the context of climate change.
Thank you, Thijs. I want to answer this from a more general perspective. We know that sustainability investing is a general trend, and it's giving a lot of tailwind to forestry and agricultural investments as well. And probably in the 10 years we have forestry agriculture as an own asset class, like we have real estate today. And this is obviously the gigantic driver. It will mean that we will get new type of investors who are thinking of investing into this asset class from a broader perspective. First of all, I think today forestry investments are argued or have been argued, or when I was raising money for a forest one, we used correlation analysis to say that why you should invest into forestry. However, we are coming into the area of or era of sustainable investing, and this one is not only starting from the return perspective. We should be more talking about outcomes, and outcomes are returns plus the impact. And this impact perspective is looking at the climate change. It's of course looking at the additional revenue streams which can be born out of the climate change, but it's as much also of the intention to do good, and the investors are going to come into this asset class much more with the eyes of with an intention to do good, to achieve results, which some of them are measurable and some are much more difficult to measure. And this will mean that the sustainability ID is coming also with a need to collaborate. And this is the gigantic change of mindset what the investors, in my view, will start to embed in their investment strategies within the next 10 years. And this is then also a collaboration which will mean that the impact side will grow as much more important factor. Of course, still the elephant in the room is the wood price and sustainable wood production, but there will be forest areas which investors are interested only as a carbon sink or as a land area for wind energy or other multiple potential usages and reasons, and all these will increase the variety of forest investors.
Thanks a lot, Petri. And with that, I think it's also a good connection with the question I have for Peter Holmgren. Peter, how do you think we can increase the investor appetite in forestry?
Well, thank you, Thais. First of all, I think we should say that the appetite is fairly high, as has already been mentioned in this discussion. Forests and forestry is quite an attractive investment class, provided that the returns and the performance of that activity is doing well from an investment perspective. And it is if you have three basic factors in place. You have a risk management that is acceptable. You have a long-term perspective, which is suitable to many of the institutional investors that we're talking about. And it's scalable so that it doesn't take too much transaction costs to bring this to scale. And it seems to me that a lot of the discussion we've had during this day so far is being taken from a very climate politics point of view. It is very much about climate financing, which is generally speaking resting on public finance. It is politically driven, which means that the long-term aspect is certainly not something you can trust in or believe in. And you have some very awkward hurdles in the investments for forest and climate. One is the concept of offsets, which is a driver for many of the actors in the space, but offsets are not really bringing about revenues on the ground. It's just makes the forest a parking place for carbon, and at best it is a parking place for carbon. At worst, it's actually harming the possibilities of returns for investments. And then you have the scalable bit. We've heard lots of talks about investment schemes, but very little has been about the small landowner on the ground, and that can be in forestry, it can also be in agriculture, and the small scale businesses that are actually operating and actually generating a revenue stream, which is actually going to bring return on the investment. How to scale those and how to build new forms of aggregators for the financial services is something that I don't see enough focus on. So perhaps as an endpoint of this first intervention, I would say that a much stronger focus on the revenue stream on the ground for the real products that are in the value chain. And together with that, a much bigger focus on how to aggregate financial services for the small scale operators. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Peter. That's very interesting. And I think that we have already some commonalities on what has been said in this panel. And I would like to go back to Marcel, because Marcel, you were the only one who didn't really address forest investment. So you highlighted the role of water, but haven't really focused on the forest investment. So what are your views on instruments and how we could increase forest investment in the decade of climate change? And of course, you can say also whether you agree that it's important to increase forest investment in the decade of climate change, in this era of climate change or not. So please, Marcel, you have the
In my opinion, we have to increase the investments in forestry and agriculture enormously, because the value is much bigger than we think. And as long as we normal investment, you have the cash flows that you can influence. But here you've got a cash flow that's not directly going to your into your return equation. Let me say, if you have a road and you build a road and it's a public good, everybody can go over that road and nobody has to pay for it. You pay it from the taxes. You can do a private public partnership, and you can make a private road and you can ask toll for it. Then you can only access the road if you pay for it. But here you've got an ecosystem services that's not local, that's global, and that's crucial for realizing our climate goals. And that's the cooling part to water, to nature. It's really the air conditioning. So when you want to, if investors investing more into agriculture and forestry, and even doing the hard part, if you do restoring of nature, that's not easy. And the low-hanging fruit, that's easy. But if you're doing the more difficult parts, you need to have somewhere in place that you, as an investor, you get a reward for maintaining the global cooling function. If that's not in place, because we're talking here about an error within the system that's called the tragedy of the commons. That's one only can be solved by pricing in negative and positive side effects, or you raise taxes and you give subsidies. As long as we don't see the cooling function and we don't see the added value of nature, that's much bigger. And now we're now discussing about. If we don't see that, you're also not reallocating the money. So it's impossible to make a business case only on the local revenues of forestry and agriculture when the biggest revenue is global, and it's the cooling part. In the Netherlands, we live on the sea level, yeah, and we pay a separate tax for maintaining our dikes so that our feet stay dry. We have a separate election for it. But as long as we don't, as a world, pay for the cooling capacity of nature, yeah, then we won't increase it because we are not rewarding all the farmers, all the investors that are doing it in forestry. So my point is, it's much more important than we ever think, yeah, but we don't reward the real value of forestry and agriculture, and that's the cooling function. As long as we stay talking about CO2, it's too narrow. You have to make it much broader. And when you see the difference, the gap between what the value is of investing in nature and how it's valuated, yeah, giving the risk return profile, and you can close the gap by giving the right incentives, then you can speed up, and then you will be able to realize your climate goals much cheaper, much faster, with less risk and more social perspective. So it's really seeing that the biggest dimension there is, and that's the cooling part. So like Bill Clinton was saying, it's economy stupid, it's the cooling part stupid, it's water.
Yeah.
And that's my point. And if you don't see that, then the whole other discussion about financing is.
Thank you, Marcel. It's very clear. Thank you very much. Patrick Kusisto, you have said already that climate change has changed the way investment decisions are made. So what are these main opportunities and risks for investment in forestry now?
Well, the first wave of the the environmental side has taken the risk side. I mean, there are many scenarios about the potential droughts, reducing the wood producing capability, for example, in South Africa. There are a lot of models about these ones. Somewhere in the Nordics, we have risks of new pests potentially destroying wood. Obviously, the monoculture can adversely affect the biodiversity. But I all in all, I'm an optimist. I think the opportunity set, and I don't think ever before forestry or agriculture has been such loaded with various type of opportunities, how to make money and how to make a positive impact for the society. And we have the hard quantitative factors, we have the qualitative factors, we have even examples from the indigenous people, how they've been able to live with the nature. I mean, like Marcel said, I may be saying this in a different way, but most likely nature is highly undervalued in our economical thinking, and most likely that will the valuation gap will be relieved, and the early investors can take benefit out of that. And the risks side additionally can be that in today's world we may be too focused just on the carbon games and forget some other aspects of the nature. Nature is much bigger thing than just carbon pricing scenario game.
Thank you, Petri. Very clear. Petri Lehtinen, ESGs are the buzzword of financial markets and 2020 marked an impressive surge in impact investments. Is this for real? How do you think this will affect forest investments?
Well, I think that it is for real, but then the kind of second part, that how it's really impacting, that we can kind of challenge and kind of question. So actually ESGs as such, it's of course now this acronym that we are using, but it has been in forest investments already a long time. We had a forest certification since 1990s, so it's already quite a long time. Maybe the thing is that if we think like how it started, the focus has been that we are kind of having a, let's say, investment, and we have this ESG criteria. It was, let's not do no harm. So that was the starting point. And that's not definitely enough. We should do something good. So I think that that's already, other participants have mentioned that. So we really should kind of do more than the minimum requirements of these ESGs. And maybe other aspect is if we compare, let's say, this kind of commercial investments considering ESG, we can say that it's kind of greening the finance, to payments for ecosystem services and this kind of finance, when we are really investing directly to conservation, biodiversity, water, whatever. We know that actually it's more, we can leverage still more private financing through this ESG pathway. But there is criticism. I just read an article, I think it was in the Forbes magazine, that actually there hasn't been really enough impact, even there is ESGs, because there is always leakage. There's always like other companies that do not follow that, and they are just they are just kind of trying to achieve the risk-adjusted returns. But I think that I'm thinking positively. I think that ESGs alone are not enough, but we are already having regulations like we have like let's say here in Europe, EU is putting in place a new kind of legislative framework demanding that all the imported commodities that are kind of risk to cause deforestation, they have to prove that it's from sustainable sources. So it's going beyond. I mean, before we have been having all these timber legal regulations that it has to be legal, but now actually the products have to be sustainable. Whatever it means that those who are kind of complying with ESGs are in a better position. So they are like the winners, I believe. So I'm thinking positively that it's a good pathway.
Thank you. And it's very interesting because you're mentioning about these timber investment, respecting biodiversity, conservation, water, and demonstrating its impact through the ESGs. And Peter Holmgren was very clear also to say, look, it's important that to move away from the climate politics and focus on what are the investment streams on the ground. And Peter, my question to you would be, does society needs reassurance about the sustainability of investments in the forest industry?
Short answer, yes. I think it's part of the business case and business process these days that those assurances are in place, not just in forestry, but in most sectors. But I would also say that what makes the forest-based sector and also the land-based sectors in general, but we're talking about the forest-based sector, a little bit different is that it is so obvious that investments for the wood-based value chains are very much going hand in hand with the objectives we want to fulfill when it comes to the climate. And we could even stretch that to biological diversity under certain circumstances, but I won't do it today. My point is that the climate politics have big difficulties in handling a situation like that when the climate benefits comes for free, so to speak. Investments in forest management increases the growth, decreases the damages, delivers renewable material that stores carbon even longer, and also substitutes fossil-based materials. So you have, and we have innovation coming, and we have new services coming, like capturing the carbon dioxide, and we have lots of opportunities to improve this circular bioeconomy. But the climate politics is not built in that way. The climate politics is a one-way street. You can have co-benefits of climate actions. You can put public money or other people's money into climate actions, and then you can count on co-benefits from those spent money. But it doesn't work the other way around. You can't invest in the forest-based sector and then bring the climate benefit into the climate politics. It's not constructed that way, and this is a big problem.
So let me use these last minutes and make the question. Thank you, Peter, because this is a very good point. And just make the key question, I think, that arises from this discussion on what could be the role, or what is the role of forest investment in the decade of climate change, which is a decade of climate change, but is also the decade of the decade for action on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we spoke a lot about nature here. We didn't speak a lot about peoples, and those are a very important variable in this equation as well. So my question to you is, what is the role of wood in the forest investment in the decade of climate change, and how it can be reconciled and rewarded as part of this equation to address climate change, achieve a climate resilient planet, and also a more equitable planet and more sustainable food systems?
Nothing more. That was for me?
For all of you. So who wants to come first?
Well,
I will start with Marcel provocatively, because you have already addressed this question more or less. And Marcel spoke a lot about nature. And Marcel, how we bring people into the picture, and how we bring wood as an ecosystem provision, as an ecosystem service as well into the equation.
Wood is always a cash flow when you're doing investments in nature. The only thing is, you have to not think in wood, but in restoring the clean water level. And if you do that, and you do that through wood, then you see that wood has also a revenue in it. When you look at the social part, when you have to restore nature, you have to take into account we have also a lot of demand for space. So we also have to regenerate not only agriculture, but you have to connect cities to agriculture. You have to connect agriculture to forest. It's impossible to do it in 1 minute, but if you want to know more about how to integrate the cooling function and the investments into your policy, there's a video on ourgreenspine.org. There you can also see how you can create a free climate insurance policy when you see the dimension of water. And if you don't see the dimension of water, then the investment equation You will not solve the investment
Okay.
equation. It's impossible. So I
I will stop here with the insurance policy. I think it's a good one. Patrick Usisto. And then
I think wood is important in that sense. We talk about climate change. We have a cult who is talking now about net zero at 2050. And we can just simply think that if people are utilizing more wood for construction projects, a life cycle analysis of buildings is that construction is 40% of your carbon footprint, and then the maintenance of the building is over its life is 60%. If we remove that 40%, it's already a massive deed for the climate mitigation, and this can be done now. And a lot of this climate change is what it's lacking is actions today. And I'm also part of one climate change fund for equities and bonds, and there the focus what is that you need to see what sort of change you can do today, because it has much more value than things what are happening at 2050.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. Peter.
Okay, so we want to get rid of the fossils. That's what we really want to do. And so the solutions obviously is about making better use, more efficient use, and more sustainable use of the biological systems. That's what we need to manage. That's what we need to live off, and that's what we need also to conserve and all the rest of it. Fine. Now, food and fiber are, I'll say food and wood and other things are coming from the land, and we have hundreds of millions of small-scale businesses around the world that are working and delivering benefits that we need in our fossil-free society today and tomorrow. And it's a mystery to me why the finance community needs to run around the political corridor seeking public funding when you have this enormous opportunity to aggregate your investment portfolio towards these small-scale businesses that have an actual revenue stream that can deliver an actual return and at the same time deliver the climate solutions we need. So what are you waiting for?
Thank you, Peter. And I think you and Patrick are saying kind of the same thing. You're doing, going through the same pathway. And then we have 2 minutes to go. And there is a very interesting question here on the chat, actually for Patrick Lettoning, on the metrics. Because, okay, we speak a lot and we know that it's possible to have production in alignment with the climate objectives and resilience objectives, quality objectives. But then what are the metrics to demonstrate the sustainability?
So this is for me. Okay, I think that's an excellent question, by the way. What is the definition of sustainability? And I think that there is a kind of, there are more and more efforts trying to define the sustainability, and well, EU is trying to do it with a kind of financial taxonomy. That's one way, and then we have actually many certification standards that are trying to do the definition. Of course, there is no absolute definition. It's always like we have to be pragmatic, and I think that there are certain kind of minimum standards, or certain kind of, let's say, minimum criteria at least that we can agree on, that makes it like, maybe we should say that at least more sustainable towards sustainability. So I don't think that there will be an absolute sustainability. And I don't know if we, just a very short comment about wood is that actually wood is extremely important. The most typical wood product today in the global is waste. So most of the wood is wasted. Most of the wood is used as fuel wood, etc. So actually there's a huge opportunity to use the wood raw material to much more valuable purposes.
Thank you very much. I think this was, at least from my side, it was a very interesting discussion, some different points of view. I take note that it's important to look into water if we think of climate change as well. It's not only about forests or agriculture. I also take note that there is actually already an important trend to invest in the sustainable forestry, and that the impact investment will make a difference. And the impact investment is looking mostly to climate change and biodiversity. So how we can achieve that through forest investment will be a key aspect of forest investments in this coming decade. The value chains are important, and this was mentioned here many times in many different ways. And returns are important. And we're speaking about investments. And if we're speaking about investments, we cannot forget that investments are driven, and not only they're driven by returns. And if returns can not only do no harm, but do good, and we also heard this here more than once, that's what we're looking for, and that's the era where we're getting. It's a very important point, I think, of to go, and look at what is happening on the ground. What are the investment streams? What are the sustainable investment streams on the ground? And we discussed a little bit about the role of wood. Wood is some people forget that, but wood is an ecosystem service. Timber provision is an ecosystem service. And we heard here that they provide returns, that they address that it's possible to have sustainable agriculture and forest production, delivering climate change results, delivering biodiversity results, and providing returns, not only global returns and returns for investors, but also benefiting a wide range of smallholders, of small and medium producers. So it's important that we take this into consideration, and it's important to bridge the politics. It's important to bridge the discussions happening at the global forums, at the global climate change governance, and connect that with what is happening on the ground. I think this is what I hear here, and I hear about the importance of these sustainable value chains in coherence with climate and SDGs objectives. So I think our time is over now. Thank you very much. I think there was an excellent discussion. I hope that the summary has made justice to the discussions we had. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.